So I quickly want to just go over how to do the unit circle, but just focusing on our angles. So I'm going to do our angles in both 30-degree increments and 45-degree increments. Okay, so I'm going to focus on degrees first. Okay, so I'm going to do my degrees. And remember, we're going up by increments of 30 degrees. Okay, so that's the first one I'm going to focus on is my 30-degree increments. So in this case, this is my 30-degree. Okay, now think about it. 30 plus 30 will give me 60 degrees. Now, it's really important to understand that this middle one is representing 45 degrees. Okay, so right now, 30 degrees, 60 degrees. My next number would be 90 degrees, right? 60 plus 30 is 90. 90 plus 30 gives me 120 degrees. And we will just keep going around like that. 120 plus 30 is 150 degrees, 180 degrees. 180 plus 30 is 210 degrees. 210 plus 30 is 240 degrees, and I'm sure you get the point. So I will just finish off our 30-degree jumps, and then this would be 330 degrees, and then we get to 360 degrees. And of course, you start off at 0 degrees, right? And you could keep going around and around and around, but we're just going to limit ourselves between 0 and 360 degrees. Now, how does that relate to radians? Well, remember, when you go up by increments of 30 degrees, in radians, 30-degree jumps are shown by n pi over 6, okay? And that n is how many jumps you made from the positive x-axis, okay? So, of course, we would start off at 0 radians right here, okay? And then our first jump, we would make it pi over 6 because it's simply just 1 pi over 6. Our second jump, we're going to still have pi over 6, but now we made 2 jumps, so 2 pi over 6. Okay, and our top one here, well, now we're at 3 pi over 6. And something to recognize is we can simplify these, and oftentimes problems will simplify these. Okay, so 3 pi over 6 we can simplify into pi over 2. And that's usually how our 90-degree angle is represented. It's usually represented as pi over 2. 60 degrees here, so 2 pi over 6 in radians can be represented as pi over 3. Okay, so hopefully we can kind of see. So we have 1 pi over 6, 2 pi over 6, 3 pi over 6. Then we're at 4 pi over 6 over here, 5 pi over 6, 6 pi over 6. Now recognize that's a nice fraction because 6 divided by 6 gives us 1. So this is simply pi, and that's how you're always really going to see 180 represented. And remember, we use that already. 180 equals pi. We use this to convert between radians and degrees because it's a very easy ratio to deal with. Okay, so we're at 6 pi over 6. This would be 7 pi over 6. Then we have 8 pi over 6. 9 pi over 6. Okay, and 9 pi over 6, we can simplify quite a few of these, but I'm just pretty much simplifying our quadrantal angles because they're kind of the most important ones to know how to simplify because that's usually what they're going to be represented as. So this will be represented as 3 pi over 2. Okay, so we're at 9, then we're at 10 pi over 6, and 11 pi over 6. And then finally 12 pi over 6, and recognize this is a quadrantal angle, and this is 2 pi. So you're usually going to see 2 pi as a full revolution. Okay. Now what about our 45 degrees, right? We have jumps of 45 degrees. So 45 degrees is when the line splits the quadrant in half. Okay, so it's important to know that if you walked along this path up to the 90 degrees, it would be the same length as if you walked this path to our 0 degrees, okay? So it splits it right in half, at least our quadrant right in half. So this would be 45 degrees, And now if you go up by increments of 45, well, 45 plus 45 gives us 90. Okay, 90 plus 45 gives us 135 degrees. 135 plus 45 gives us 180 degrees. So you can see the quadrantal angles are related both to 45 and 90 degrees. 180 degrees plus 45 degrees gives us 225 degrees. 225 degrees gives us 270 degrees. 270 degrees plus 45 gives us 315 degrees. And then 315 degrees plus 45 gives us 360 degrees as well. Now, how do we make our jumps in terms of 45 degrees? Well, 45-degree jumps, I guess I'll write it over here again. 45-degree jumps, all we're changing is our denominator. It's n pi over 4, where n is the number of jumps. Okay, so we start at 0, so 0 pi over 4 is just simply 0. And then we make our first jump and we get pi over 4. Okay, our next jump, we would have 2 pi over 4. And recognize that's 90 degrees. And if we simplify this, it equals pi over 2, just like it did for our pi over 6 jumps. Okay, so we're at 2 pi over 4. Then we get to 3 pi over 4. Then we're at 4 pi over 4. And recognize 4 pi over 4 also just equals pi. Okay, so things are working out here. 4 pi over 4. Now we're at 5 pi over 4. So this would be 5 pi over 4. Then we get to 6 pi over 4. And if you simplify this, hopefully you recognize this is also 3 pi over 2. Okay, and then we were at 6, so we're at 7 pi over 4. And to finish it off here, we get 8 pi over 4, which of course equals 2 pi, because we know 2 pi equals 360 degrees when we convert it to degrees. So it's really important to understand how to determine the angles in both degrees and in radians. So I hope that was helpful for you.